So welcome everyone to it's our first semicha class. Actually, the first in the second cycle. I started like 2 years ago. Low key, some of you participated in those classes. They're all recorded. They're all on the Spreaker app semicha program. Under this title, if you go to the Spreaker app or Spreaker.com and you search for and monitor my name for the show called Semicha Program, you'll find all these classes, which were basically introductions to halachic literatures. We went through the process of the writing of the Mishnah, how Midrash Halacha works, and the creation of the Talmud, the way Maimonides describes it in his introduction to Mishneh Torah. So we went through these introductions: the introduction to Mishneh Torah, the introduction to the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah, Aruch HaShulchan, and Yalkut Yosef. So we try to get as much as possible all the major works of halacha, to be able to understand where the poskim came from when they either created anthologies of halacha or psak halacha. What was their modus operandi? What was their rationale? So we went through this. So this is available already recorded. I want to explain a little bit about the program because the people asked how exactly this is going to happen. So for now, we're going to start with the one class a week. If time allows and we see that it is possible, we will do more. Maybe at times I will tell you I'm going to record 2 or 3 classes a week to catch up with the volume of material, and it's there. You could listen in your free time and catch up with that. The idea of semicha and of knowing like when is one ready for the to issue a psak halacha is very simple. It's really the ability to look at sources and analyze them correctly and arrive at a conclusion which is logical and solid based on these halachic sources. This is the rule of the posek, and the role of the posek is to issue this kind of psak halacha. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot speaks about the message of Anshe Knesset Gedola, and it says that one of their sayings was "V'ha'amidu talmidim arbeh." "V'ha'amidu talmidim arbeh," many people translate as "have many students," but the language is very specific. It doesn't say teach many students. It says "V'ha'amidu," meaning make your students stand on their own. So the idea of Anshe Knesset Gedola was to create leaders who, in turn, will be able to stand on their own 2 feet, make the psak halacha when necessary, and continue to impact others. So some people would maybe feel that they're ready to issue a psak for themselves. Some for others. We'll see, based on the writings and the way people write, basically responsive. That will be the task. We will present certain questions, certain situations, and people will have to write an analysis of that. And if people use it in the right manner and with the right tools, then we know that the time has come. And people might do it at a different pace, and that's okay. And during the week, you could email me, you could ask me questions. I'll try to be available as much as possible. I'm doing a couple other things at the same time, but hopefully we'll be able to do that. And that's it. So let us start. Let us start with Ilchot Avelut. That was the introduction. Welcome everyone again. We're starting with Ilchot Avelut, and as the rule, as have you seen in my writings also, and this is the way, especially of the Sephardic rabbis, when you approach any halacha, any topic, the first thing you have to do is go to the Tanakh. This is the first source. We want to look at the biblical sources and understand where do the halachot come from, where are they rooted, and what was their character in biblical times. There are 2 components here. I'm talking about biblical times in the sense of the halakha that is written in the Torah, but also in terms of practice. How did people practice the halacha? Because we know that sometimes there's a disparity. For example, when we talk about the treatment of Eved Ivri, of slavery, the Torah says in Parashat Mishpatim, Shesh shanim ya'avodu v'shevi'it yitzeh lahofshi chinam. He has to work 6 years, and on the 7th year he will be released. But in practice, people did not do that, as we find in the book of Yirmiyah. The Navi rebukes the people for not letting their slaves go. Or when we speak about idolatry and many other things that were not kept exactly the way the Torah demanded. And there's another series that is on Spreaker called the Halacha in the Tanakh, which I recommend listening to. So I'm going to share the screen now with this. I'm going to open the file that I sent before. 1 second. This is the compilation of sources from the Tanakh. I sent you just the references, and Josh, thank you so much for putting them all together in Sefaria and making it available for everyone. So 1 second, I'm going to open it and we can share it on the screen. So actually, it's appropriate that in this week's parasha we are going to read Hayei Sarah. This is the first time that we read about Avelut. 1 second. The first time they read about Avelut, about mourning, is the story of Abraham coming to look for a burial plot for Sarah, and he has this long discussion with the Hittites about getting a plot for her. Probably discuss it in the next class, which is about the parasha. What Abraham basically was trying to do, he wanted to have a foothold in the land. So this is the first instance that we find of Avelut, sort of Avelut and eulogy in the Tanakh. But now we're going to look at the sources and see what people did and how did they display their sorrow. So now I'm sharing the screen. You can see it, right? And we start with this verse. It's a very it's a known story. Reuven returns to the pit after. Okay, so we have this story, the famous story. Yosef was thrown to the pit. The brothers decide that it's not the right thing to do. Let's pull him out, sell him to the Ishmaelim. He's not there, and then we read this. Reuven returned to the pit. He saw that Joseph was not in the pit. He rent his clothes. So the immediate reaction of Reuven is to tear his clothes. That is something that we do until today. We call it the kiri'ah, tearing the clothes. But in this case, Yosef is not dead. Yosef is gone. He doesn't know what happened to Yosef. So that is a verse that shows us that tearing one or ripping apart one's clothes is a sign of agony and distress. Not necessarily as mourning for the dead, but just that display of sorrow. When they come to Yaakov, we read this: Jacob, when they told him that Yosef went missing and he doesn't have him, Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and observed mourning for his son many days. In terms of rigid halacha, that would not have been practiced today, because there would be no evidence that Yosef was killed. Until you have direct evidence and not circumstantial evidence that someone died, you cannot sit shiva for him. So that's one of the instances where we'll see that biblical practice is not exactly what we know of today. But in any case, this is in Bereshit, Genesis 37, verse 34. He rents his clothes, he puts sackcloth on his loins, and observed mourning for his son many days. Many days, there's no limit. And as we understand, even when Yosef finally sent the message decades later that he is alive, Yaakov was still in the stage of mourning. And we'll go back to this question of comforting the mourners and the shiva later on, in terms of what is the Torah asks us to do. Then again, we're still talking about Yaakov. So we're going to in Bereshit chapter 49. That's a very very interesting story, and completely out of line with the halacha as it is today. And that is the delay in the burial of Yaakov. Yaakov was in verse 3 of chapter 43. The physician embalmed Israel. It required 40 days. For such is the full period of embalming, and then they bewailed him 70 days. So it's already 110 days. And then when they go to Gor and Atad on the other side of the Jordan, they practice the mourning for 7 days. So the 7 days were only after the funeral caravan arrives in Eretz Israel. So it's probably another month. So this is something that we see between the death of Yaakov and his burial, maybe 4 or 5 months passed until the burial took place. This is in stark contrast to what we know today, where the Hevra Kadisha, the rabbis, put pressure on the family to bury their dead as soon as possible. This is not something that is written in the Torah in that context. It comes from a later source that we'll see about someone who has been executed. He says, "Lo talin nivrato ala etz ki kilelat Elohim talui." You should not leave someone who was hung or executed in that manner, because it's a disgrace. So just to reconcile the sources and the halakha that we keep today to understand how we have such disparity, well, I will say that it all has to do with the respect that we show to the dead person, to the deceased, and the respect that we show the living. And a lot of what happens around burial, mourning, Avelut, all these things has to do with the norms and the practices of the community. What is the community sees as something acceptable? And therefore, if that was the common thing in Egypt, and Yaakov was treated as royalty, they had to do that. The other problem with this whole story, obviously, is the embalming, which is was not an easy or not a nice process. Rather, it involved an autopsy. Basically, the body was cut, and all the inner parts were taken out, maybe buried separately. We don't know exactly how they did it with Yaakov, but embalming is definitely not something that is done in Jewish practice. There is and I'm moving a little bit forward into the later literature, just because this is immediately connected. There is a teshuvah by the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, from 14th century Spain, about a body that had to be transferred from one place to another. It was very difficult, and he was asked whether they could pour lime on the body, so the flesh would be burnt away. They will consume the flesh, and only the bones will remain, and then we'll be able to transport the bones more easily. And he based his psak, his ruling, on that story of Yaakov. He said, since we see that was done to Yaakov, what is called Chvod Hamed, Yekara de Shachvei, we could also do it in this case. And as we'll see also, when we get to Mishnaic literature, the practice at the time of the Mishnah was actually to exhume the body after a year and rebury the bones in a different constellation. So that's another story. However, we see with the Yaakov, embalming and a delay of the burial of almost 4 months, and the Evel Shivat Yamim, the 7 days of mourning, are done immediately before the funeral, but months after the burial. Now we get to the core, probably, of the laws that are related to when we get to the legal part of the Torah. That's Leviticus Vayikra. In chapter 21, we read that the Kohanim are not allowed to become impure by touching a dead body, and there are only the only exceptions are the immediate family. כי אם נשארו הקרוב אליו, לאמו ולאביו ולבנו ולביתו ולאחיו ולאחותו הבתולה קרובה אליו, אשר לא הייתה לאיש להיט טמא. He can only become tamei, can only contract impurity of the dead, handling the burial of his mother, his father, his son, daughter, brother or unmarried sister. So we understand that a married sister, that she should be taken care of by her husband. You note that the wife is not directly written here. The rabbi said that she'ero karov elav zo ishto. The one close in kin is that refers to the wife. The question, we don't see here any clear explanation of what are the practices of Avelut, just that idea of impurity. The important idea I think that we have to discuss here, and it relates to the work of the rabbi, is the question why. Now stop share for a moment so we can see everyone. Why is it that the Torah forbids the Kohanim from becoming tameh, met? What is that great fear of becoming tameh, of contracting impurity? So, in my opinion, as I have, it's not for discussion now because there are many sources about that, but I believe that the reason for that is that the Torah tries to alienate Bnei Israel, to remove them from the Egyptian culture as much as possible. Now, in Egypt, the culture was a culture of death. Death was worshipped. There you have the pyramids, the Valley of the Dead. A person who was preparing for his death had to go and consult a priest or a scholar who will tell him exactly how to conduct his journey through that netherworld. And if he didn't do it correctly, he would be doomed for eternity. And so the Kohanim became, in a sense, the gatekeepers of death. If someone wants to die correctly, it goes to them. The Torah, by contrast, is the Torah of life. The idea of the Torah is to live your life correctly. Death is not this is not the most important thing. What happens after death? It's not, at least not in the Torah. So one of the arguments of why Olam Haba or life after death are not mentioned in the Torah is that the Torah did not want us to start living our life thinking about what will happen in the world to come, but rather correct and do tikkun olam at the moment of where we live. So the fact that the Kohanim cannot become tameh, they cannot contract impurity, prevented them from taking responsibility of burial and mourning and all these rituals, and put it back or kept it in the hands of the family, and which is really how it should be. It could be Hevra Kadisha, like it is today, people who are dedicated to that, but who do it voluntarily and do not see that as their profession. The problems with having that role, as it is today, in the hands of the rabbinical establishment, is that sometimes it becomes a technical thing. Instead of the rabbi being there to provide support and understanding and lead people through the process, it becomes a mechanical, technical thing. Do this, do that. A lot of prohibitions, and in many cases also a question of money, of an income for the rabbi, and that should not happen. So the Torah put the Kohanim away from the grave to show that they are people who serve Hashem in the Torah of life. But the exceptions are their immediate family, because of their sorrow, they have to be involved in that. And also, like the rabbi says, med mitzvah, if someone passed away and there's no one to take care of him, that trumps everything, that you must take care of that person. And like I said, again, unfortunately today, we have sort of corrupted that idea by creating a whole class of rabbis who take care only of that. And I had more than one case when I was contacted by someone in a remote place or not a member of a synagogue, who asked for a rabbi to come and deliver a eulogy. And I usually would work with the family. I said, I will come and read a mizmor or say kaddish, but I would like one of the family members to lead the essential part of the eulogy, because you knew the person, you really knew that person, and it's not for the rabbi to come and just drop a Devar Torah out of nowhere to sort of punch the card. We did what is right. So that is a sort of side comment on that, but it's important to understand in the context of Avelut. Then we have in Devarim Yud Daled, Deuteronomy chapter 14 verses 1 and 2. Banim atem l'Adonai Elohechem lo tidgodedu velo tasimu kocha ben einechem lamet. You are children of Hashem your God. You shall not gash yourself or shave the front of your heads because of the dead. Now this is not an exact translation. It means do not create a bald spot between your eyes. There's another pasuk that speaks about the Kohanim, and even though the classic translation is shave, I believe that meaning of that koha, of creating a bald spot, is pulling bunches of hair, which people still do today, which is it's a display of sorrow. People want to harm themselves to participate in the sorrow, in the physical way, in the emotional sorrow of the mourners. The Torah says, and that in line with what we said about the Kohanim, the Torah is a Torah of life. It's not a Torah of death or a Torah of violence. So harming yourself will not bring any good. It will just create another person who is wounded, another person who is suffering. The idea of the same thing of Latasimu Koha is to pull hair, and there are still people who do it today as a sign of mourning. Not as much, pulling hair, but hitting their face. You will see it in mourning practices in some societies, in some places in the Middle East. The Persian Shiites, in their commemoration of the death of Ali, it's a fast they call it Ashura. They hid themselves with swords and blades tied to chains and wound themselves as a sign of mourning. So Torah says we don't do that. But what is missing from the Torah? What is missing from the Torah, it's glaringly missing from the Torah, is a commandment to mourn. We don't have anywhere a commandment by the Torah to mourn a person. I mean, the closest that we get there is, let me share something else here with you. The closest that we get here in the Torah is in the story of what is called Eshet Yifator, the captive woman, the woman who was captured at war. And the Torah says there the following. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 10 to 13. The Torah says the following: when you go to war and you capture a beautiful woman and you take her to be your wife, she is going to shave her hand, she's going to clip her nails, or some say grow her nails, and then she would remove the clothes with which she was captured, apparently to wear clothes of mourning. And she should mourn for her father and mother a whole month. Now have in mind, we're not talking here about a Jewish, or rather this is an Israelite. It's not an Israelite woman. She's not bound by the laws of the Israelite community. This is before she's converted, before she becomes Jewish. So what we see here is not a commandment, but rather a descriptive paragraph. The Torah describes the process, what people do when they mourn. They tear their clothes. They don't want to look good. Shave their head, let their nails grow, or clip them. Whatever they think is the right thing. They wear sackcloth. They put ashes on their head. This is the common thing to all these practices. And when you look around traditional societies all over the world, we realize that people are looking for examples for actions to display their sorrow, whether it's wearing black or bringing flowers or playing requiem and sad music. To each his own. This is how it's done. So why is it important to know that? Because in many cases, people will ask, so what is the obligation? What is the commandment? What does it have to do? The answer to that is, and I'm sure you've experienced that, unfortunately, in different situations in your lives. The answer is that mourning cannot be a commandment. So when we'll go through the sources, rabbinical sources, we'll see that there are opinions that say that one must practice mourning one day. The maximum that you could say is a biblical obligation is one day, Avelut Yom Echad. But come to think of it logically, if someone passed away in one's family and the surviving relative does not feel any sorrow, for whatever reason, that he was alienated, let's say someone who was alienated from his father, someone who was harassed by his father. There were cases like that were brought to modern poskim, and they said you have to practice Avelut, but I think it's preposterous. Someone who was harassed or abused by their parents cannot mourn for them. They have mourned already in childhood for the death of their own innocent child. This is not what they have to do. So even if you force them, say, okay, they go into the rabbi said, no, you have to sit shiva. So go sit over there, tear your clothes, don't wear shoes, whatever it is. That person would not feel sorrow. It might feel maybe anger that he's being obligated to do that, but he will not feel sorrow if that is not an innate emotion, and vice versa. If one is being told, okay, your mourning period is 7 days or 1 month, and that's what you have to do, and you cannot go beyond that, if a person is not comforted, if it doesn't feel that he found consolation, that would not help. And this especially is true in the case of bereft parents. Parents who lost a child is the most difficult thing. Never almost overcome. It's very, very rare. Even if they pretend to overcome, there's something always lingers, this kind of mourning in the back of their mind. So the Torah never speaks in the language of this is what you must do for Avelut. So we keep that in mind. I'm going back to the text that we put on Sefaria. It's in Shemuel. We have the same thing, the same story. On the third day, a man came from Shaul camps with his clothes rent and earth on his head. That's a practice that we've seen before. David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and so did all the men with him. The importance of this text is that here the people who were mourning, the people who tore their clothes, are not relatives. So we could say that this is because the king and his son were killed, Shaul and Yehonatan were killed, and many people died. But we see that those rigid boundaries, as we have them today, of you do the kriya only for direct relatives, did not exist. And we'll see different examples as we go through Mishnah and other sources. Even in Shulchan Aruch, there's still situations where one tears his clothes for someone who is not his relatives. So they mourn, they fasted until the evening. Another story in Shmuel, in second Shmuel 14:2, Yoav tries to persuade King David to bring back Avshalom. So he asks a wise woman to pretend to be mourning her son, and the way to pretend is put on mourning clothes and don't anoint yourself with oil, and that you will act like a woman who has grieved a long time over a departed one. So we see another element, not anointing oneself with oil, that spilled over to our time with the idea of not taking a bath, not taking a shower. And we'll have time together, but I'll just say, for the sake of knowledge, that there are several modern poskim today, including Rabbi Yitzhak Abadi. I hold the same thing, that say that the idea of not taking a shower or a bath a whole week doesn't apply today. The world has changed. In the time of the Mishnah, people regularly bathed once a week. They took a shower once a week. We know that from the Takana that the decree to wash clothes on Thursday to be ready for Shabbat, meaning that during the week they didn't wash them, they wore the same thing. People didn't have the luxury to do that. Maybe they went into the river, but today, when we shower, take a bath regularly, to show the Avelut, it's enough if one skips a bath or does it with less luxury than he does it regularly. Otherwise, the suffering is really not. It's not about suffering; it's about lack of dignity. People feel that they are not dignified when this is forbidden. And as I mentioned before, a lot of this has to do with one's feelings about the situation. We have several other situations, psukim here that speak about renting clothes, and 2 Kings 22, Isaiah 22. I want to look at this one of the important chapters that highlights the practices of Avelut is chapter 9 in Jeremiah. This is in verse 16 and 19 to 19 in this, or verse 16. Thus said Hashem, listen, summon the dirge singers, let them come. Send for the skilled women, let them come. So he speaks about a disaster, the destruction of the temple. He says, let them quickly start a wailing for us, that our eyes may run with tears, our pupils flow with water. Hear, O women, this is in verse 19, let your ears receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing and one another lamentation. So what Yirmiyahu teaches us here is that there was a professional class of mourners or wailers, of women who would attend the funeral and would arouse people to cry and mourn. This we don't see that anymore. Not in America, obviously. I'll just tell you, I was in Pittsburgh this week for the funeral for some of the people who were killed in the massacre of the brothers David and Cecil Rosenblatt. May this be the Eloi Nishmatam, and like I've seen in other funerals in America that the mentality is to keep everybody at bay. We don't want to display our emotions. We don't want people to cry. We don't want people to be agitated. Let's pretend that everything is nice and dandy. Let the mourners keep their feelings for themselves. And that is unhealthy. This is not the way of the Torah, and it's not a healthy way. And I'm saying it sort of like in parentheses because of what we read now in Yirmiyahu, and I think it's important. What the Torah wants us to do. Not the Torah, sorry. It's like I just explained this is not the Torah, but the practice that has evolved in Judaism over time are meant first and foremost to facilitate mourning for us. They're not there to tell us what to do. You have to sit on a chair that's 5 inches from the ground or 10 inches from the ground. And believe me, there were situations like that when a rabbi comes into the house and he tells the mourner, your chair is not low enough. This is not what mourning is all about. It's about allowing people to display their grief and to be with others who show them support. And I think from your experience working with people, I'm sure you have seen that the Shiv'ah and the Shloshim and the year, the fact that people come to Kaddish, they feel connected to the community and they feel very strengthened by that. But the other side of at the beginning of what I'm saying, showing or displaying your emotions, there are two instances when this happens in Jewish tradition. One is the Kriyah, and the other one is a minhag that evolved later, and it's called Zibula Batraita, or the last act of Hesed, the last mound of soil. The first is tearing the clothes, which is I admit is a very, very hard thing for me to do as a rabbi when I'm at the funeral. I feel it almost has a measure of cruelty in it, to approach the mourners and give them a little razor or knife and say, okay, here, tear your clothes and say this blessing. But I explained to them, and I think this is true, that act of tearing the clothes and ripping them apart allows them to display their grief and their anger and their despair and spill it out instead of keeping it in. Keeping it in doesn't help. It remains bottled in, and it comes back later to haunt you. And I know of cases of people who cried, me included. I cried at funerals of people that I didn't know very well, but it was a continuation of the grief for my relatives, for my grandfather, that I didn't have enough time to mourn when he passed away. And the practice of Judaism tries to help us go through this. One more thing before we return to the text, I recommended, I asked people to read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross' book, Death is Vital to Life. It is it's an amazing book, especially because it comes from a point of view of someone who's a person of faith, not Jewish, but at a certain point, it transcends the idea of Jewish or any other religion. And but even though she's trained as a psychiatrist, you see that deep conviction, understanding of the human soul, which is beautiful, and also gives a lot of strength to people who are involved in counseling and being with mourners, being with people who are suffering. It gives a very deep sense of understanding. And it's important to note here that Kubler-Ross said, I mean, at least allegedly, I mean, I need to find the quote, but I heard it from several experts on the field, that the Jewish system is the most adequate to take care of a person during mourning and during death, because there's a gradual display of grief, and then a gradual process of coming back to life with the community around you. So that is a very important thing to have in mind, and I recommend reading her books, especially this one, and if you could put your hands on other books of hers, that is important. We're going to go back to the biblical texts. So in this verse of Yirmiyahu, we find that the Mekonenot, they are official wailers that help people cry in case they're not there, and that is something, especially when it's done in a crowd, that when one person starts, it could affect others. In another chapter in Yirmiyahu, in chapter 16, this is a prophecy of destruction, and part of it's a curse, and part of the curse is that there will be no proper burial. So he says, the sons and daughters that may be born in this place, they shall die gruesome deaths. They shall not be lamented or buried. They shall be like dung on the surface of the ground. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their corpses shall be food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. This is a common description in other places in the Tanakh. This is the ultimate curse that someone will not be buried, and that's the understanding. That is our understanding as a society of the dignity of the dead. That proper burial is for that person to be put underground. There are many different explanations for that, but I think primarily it's that it's our fear of that transition of someone who was alive, who was an intelligent, thinking, communicating person, and all of a sudden that switch, it could happen in a second, and we don't understand what happened. So we're trying to hide it away out of respect to the dead, but also out of great respect for ourselves. This is what we're worried about. And there are societies, I think among some tribes of Native Americans, that would leave their dead out in the field for their flesh to be consumed, and then they would bury the bones. So a lot of it has to do with the societal norms. But in Yirmiyahu, we see obviously that the idea of people dying without proper burial is the ultimate curse. But then it says, "Umetu gdolim uktanim ba'aretz hazot." Now let's go back to verse 5. "Ki כה אמר Adonai, אל תבוא בית מרזח, ואל תלך לספוד ואל תנוד להם. For thus said Hashem, do not enter the house of mourning." The word marzeach is not a clear word. We don't know what it is. In modern Hebrew, Beit Marzeach is a pub, so where you go for drinking, and it could be that it's related because people maybe drank to overcome their sorrow. But it says Al telech lispod, do not go to lament, and that is also not always an accurate translation, because lispod in biblical Hebrew, that's according to the Mishnah, was to tear or remove the upper part of one's clothing. That was lispod, or it was hitting one's face with the hand. So it was more a physical thing and not a eulogy as we understand them today. Ve'al tanod lahem. Here it says condole with them, but tanod is literally to move your head from side to side. Again, it's a physical display of emotion, how we feel about the the deceased. ומתו גדולים וקטנים בארץ הזאת, לא יקברו ולא יספדו להם, ולא יתגודד ולא יקרח להם. They will die, they will not be buried. Men shall not lament them, nor gash and tonsure themselves for them. And that's interesting, when we compare it to the pasuk in Leviticus that we read before, where the Torah says it's forbidden to do that, and now Yirmiyahu says this will not be done, meaning that probably, despite the biblical prohibition of not wounding yourself or making a bald spot in your head as a display of mourning, people did that. So here the Navi says it will not happen. And they should not break bread for a mourner, to comfort for a bereavement. So this is probably an accurate translation, and this is a minhag, a custom that has been preserved until today. The idea of Saudat Havra'ah, to break bread for the deceased. And it could be that here it meant just sitting with them as a community and eating with them. The way it is practiced today, the idea is that this food is brought by other people, not by the mourner, to show that he cannot sustain himself at the moment, but also to force him to come back to life. Meaning the mourners come back after the burial, and that's where they are being served food. We tell them, you must emerge from the first stage of deep mourning and start eating, coming back to life. And they will not be offered a cup of consolation for the loss of a father or mother. So this is surprising, because in all my years serving as a rabbi and doing that, so I think probably the first funeral that I attended was 40 years ago, when I was a teenager. So I've never seen that, except for once. There was one time when I came for a shiva of someone who said, declared himself an atheist. His mother was a Holocaust survivor. He said that he does not believe in God. I told him he does believe in God. He had deep belief, because he kept arguing with God. Right? I said, if you would really not believe in God, you would argue with him. You would just keep quiet. But and anyway, he sent his son to bring a case of wine to share with everyone. And that was the first time that I saw, about 10 years ago in Los Angeles, that I saw that wine was served at the shiva. But in the Tanakh, you see that was done. Velo yashkutam kostan humim al aviv al imo. That was the practice. This was the drug that helped people calm down and forget their sorrows. And then it concludes with Bet Mishteh Lo Tavo, nor shall you enter a house of feasting to sit with them to eat and drink. But not clear that it means a house of feasting. It could still relate to the Avel. So they might have had Bet Marzeah before, when the Avelut started, where they only drink wine, and then they would have a meal at the end of the Avelut of the morning. Again in Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 37, we see again the bald head, Kol Zakan Geruah, the torn beard, and then we have another interesting source in Ezekiel. Same thing, like the curse that was conveyed to Yirmiyahu, saying people will die, but they will not be granted the mourning practices they deserve. Here in chapter 24, starting with verse 15, God says to Ezekiel, he says, your wife is going to die. She's going to die in the plague, but you shall not lament or weep or let your tears flow. So first, you cannot show your grief. Anekdom, metim evel lo ta'aseh, moan softly, or really keep quiet, don't say anything. Do not practice the mourning for the dead. Pe'ercha havosh alecha, put on your turban or your hat. Una'alecha tasim be'raglecha, wear your sandals. Ve'lo ta'atle al safam, and do not cover your upper lip. And do not eat the bread of people, of comforters. So from all this, we understand that this was done. That was the custom. That is the closest to a mourning practices that we have in the Tanakh. We know of someone who would have done all that, but did not do it because Hashem told him not to do it. But if he would be mourning, he would not wear his hat. He would wrap his robe around his face. He would eat food that other people would give him, and he would not wear sandals. And that is the source in Ezekiel. Okay, we have the interesting source in Zechariah that they create a lot of problems. In later halacha, in terms of separation between men and women, the next psukim here say that on that day the wailing of in Yerushalayim shall be great as the wailing of Hadad Rimon. So they speak about a great eulogy that will be done, and then the continuation. Let me go to another source to show the continuation of that text. 1 second. It says that the everybody would have a eulogy, but it would done separately. The family of Bet David by themselves, with their wives by themselves, and the families of that tribe. Chapter 12, verse 12. Mishpachot levad. Each family would sit alone. Mishpachat Bet David levad unshehem levad. Mishpachat Ben Natan levad unshehem levad. So everybody would sit. All the families would sit. The men in one side, the women in one side. So from here, came a very strict ruling that men and women must be separated at the synagogue, must be separated even at mourning, even at the cemetery, which is really a distortion of what's written here, because, like I mentioned before, during Misped, people would tear their clothes and usually bare their upper body part, so the upper body. So that would be a very immodest thing for men and women to be in the same place. And also, it's a situation of people who are being compromised emotionally. That's probably the reason why men and women would not be together, according to that source in the Navi. So, with that, we sort of reviewed very, very briefly. So we sort of flew through it. The source in the Tanakh, there are probably more, but the overall conclusion that I wanted to draw from all these biblical sources, we see a variety of minhagim. Not necessarily keeping with the prohibitions of the Torah regarding wounding yourself, etc., and no direct commandment anywhere in the Torah that is formulated in the way that that prohibitions or commandments are formed. Like, for example, we would have expected if there is a mitzvah to mourn, right? The Torah says "V'chi yamut met," and if someone dies in the family, you should have a period of mourning, and the period of mourning is conducted thus. This is what you do: A, B, C. None of that is mentioned in the Torah. Everything is circumstantial. It's a story. It's descriptive of what do you do here, what do you do there. So that probably is the reason that later on in halacha. In the Talmud, also Mishnaic sources, they would say halacha kedivrei hamekel be'avel. We always follow the more lenient opinion, meaning the Avelut is not a place where we search for restrictions to place on people to be for humrah. Because here what we're trying to do is to facilitate the mourning for people, and we'll see that as we get to the biblical sources. So now we'll take a 5 minutes break from the discourse to hear questions. If you have questions about it, because we're moving to a new phase of the Mishnaic literature, and then we'll continue. We're free of that. So again, go to the text. No, not this one. Here. Okay, so we don't have Masechet Avelut. That's also interesting. In the Mishnah, there's with all the esoteric things that the Mishnah dedicates a full Masechta to, especially in Seder Kodashim, when there's a whole Mishnah about the nesting birds that are being brought as sacrifice and what happened if they got switched over. That's very rare, but there's no tractate, there's no Masechet that is dedicated to Avelut. to mourning. They all sort of lumped in the Masechet Moed Katan, and this is where we find the Mishnah. Hakover et meto, and it is also brought only, by the way, as a secondary issue, because we're talking about the halachot of the holiday, of the regel. The Mishnah says, what happens if there was a burial before the holiday? So, the Mishnah says this, Hakover et meto shelosha yamim kodem laregel, batla hemenu gzerat shiv'a. Shmona, batla hemenu gzerat shloshim. Mipnei shamru, Shabbat ola ve'ena mafseket, regalim mafsikim ve'ena olim. So, here we speak about someone who buried a relative 3 days prior to the holiday. In that case, he doesn't have to sit Shiva. And if the burial took place 8 days before the holiday, he doesn't have to observe the halachot that are related to the Shloshim. And the Mishnah explains, because they said, who are those who said? It's previous generation. It's not something that is in the Torah. Shabbat ola ve'ena mafseket. Shabbat is counted as one of the 7 days and does not disrupt the Shiva. Regalim mafsikim ve'ena olim. The holidays disrupt the Shiva, but they're not counted as part of the Avelut. Now, if you're familiar with halakha as it is today, this is not what we do. The rule is that any time period before the holiday that one started the Shiva takes away the Shiva, even if it was 1 hour. And it's not always good. I know families who felt that they were deprived of the ability to sit Shiva. And obviously this has to do with a different view of the Avelut or the Shiva as it was back then. But this is what the Mishnah says, and we'll later on we'll see in the Gemara how this is analyzed. But just to have in mind that this is where Avelut is mentioned in the Mishnah. In the Tosefta, there's a little more elaboration here. Hakoveret meto shnei yamim kodem haregel, mafsik et haregel, umone hamisha achar haregel. So the Mishnah now, the Tosefta expands on that. The Mishnah said regalim mafsikim ve'enam olim, so the regel stops, but that is not part of the Shiva. So the Tosefta says that if one only had 2 days prior to the regel, mafsik et regel umoneh hamisha achar regel. So he does 2 days before the holiday and 5 days after the holiday. And this again not something that we do today. And we'll get to this idea of shlosha yamim, that in the past there was the 3 first days of the Avelut were more intense than the rest of the week. Verabim mitaskin bo, umelachto naaset al yedei acherim, avadav v'shifchotav osim betzina'a etzel acherim. So and during that phase of Avelut, Rabbi mitaskin bo, so people come and visit him. It's considered an official Avelut, and people come over to visit him. And people could work for him and do his work. And his servants, even though they are his possession, we're talking about people who are his possession, can work could work with other people, but they should not do it publicly. This because it would be disrespectful. So here we see that there is a communal participation in that mourning, that even the slave and servants are not going to work regularly as they do. I want to skip for a second. We'll go back to those Mishnayot later, to that halacha, because we spoke about the David HaMelech that tore his clothes for Shaul and Yonatan, and with him the rest of the people. So in halacha Yud Zayin we read that Hacham shemet hakol kerovav, hakol kor'in v'hakol choltzin v'hakol sofdin v'hakol mavrin alav afilu birchova shel ir. So if a scholar died, if it's someone who's a leader of the community and is a teacher, Akol Kovav, everybody's considered a relative. They all have to tear their clothes. Ve'akol Holtzin. So here we find for the first time a new concept that is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch but is not practiced today, and that's called halitzat hakatef. And people used to, as they walked with the gurney or carrying the coffin, they would bare their shoulders. They would pull their right or left sleeve all the way to the elbow and bare their shoulders to show Avelut, because this way they're not fully dressed. V'akol sofdin, and everybody does a hesped. So obviously this is not a eulogy, because you can't have everybody eulogize. That will take forever. V'akol mavrin alav, and everybody's allowed to bring food to share together. Afilu b'chova shel ir. But we're still talking about Hol HaMoed. En molichin halilin lebet ha'evel. You cannot bring the bagpipes to the house of mourning. Ela lebet ha'mishteh or lebet ha'simcha b'makom shenahagu. That could be done only for festivity. So the one thing that is being held back at Hol HaMoed is that you don't bring bagpipes to play dirges. That was not accepted, and we'll see that in Mishnaic times there was music at the funeral, which again, this is not something that is very common in the Orthodox community. In non-Orthodox services, this sometimes is done, but also not very common. I mean, people would sing, but even in the non-Orthodox funerals that I've attended or officiated at, there were maybe one or two cases where there was actual music. One case where the woman who passed away was a violinist, so there were someone who played violin in her memory, but very rare. But in the time of the Mishnah, that was the practice. There would be bagpipes, and it was such an important thing that it was part of the obligation of the husband in the ketubah to make sure to provide that in his wife's funeral he will take care of the mekonenot, of the wailing women, and of the bagpipes. Eizeu misped ze she'al halev shneimar al shadayim sofdim tipuach bayadayim kilus ze pishut zeruot. Now the Mishnah explains what is misped, what is tipuach, what is kilus. So in here it's obvious that misped is not what we do today. It is not eulogy. So misped ze al halev, that people hid their chest. Sheneemar al shadayim sofdim, because they quote a pasuk that says the breast are sofdim. Tipuach bayadayim. Litfuach is yad al yad, is either to clap hands, or as I said, I've seen people hitting their face, like slapping their face. Kilus ze pishut zeruot, and kilus is opening their arms to the sky. So they had different practices of showing by their body motions the sorrow. We're reviewing some of these elements, and we'll see later on in the Talmud Yerushalmi that not only for those 7 relatives that we know today, people would mourn, but even for secondary relatives. So that is something that we have to look into later. But so far we've covered the biblical sources. We started getting into the Mishnaic sources to see what is that we have there, and this is just a preparation to look later on into when we start the tour and the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll go through the sources. Now, if you didn't get this source sheet, it's the one entitled Semicha Launch. I'll send it again so everybody could have it. Let me now address the question that was raised here. Maybe we could do it before we finish the class. So in the chat we have these questions. Okay, if someone passed away on Erev Shabbat, if the burial was not conducted before Shabbat, the burial starts after the Shiva today starts after the burial after Shabbat. But if one had a chance to sit Shiva even 1 hour before Shabbat, that's when the Avelut starts. So it will end on a Thursday. It will be from Friday to Thursday. Is there a correlation between mourner wearing a talit during the Shiva period and donning sackcloth as the pasuk describes? I don't think that there is a correlation. The talit is really because the mourner goes to the synagogue, he goes to pray, but other than that, we don't have that practice. Someone comments here, in Yerushalayim they bury Motzei Shabbat. It's correct. I am a Yerushalmi. I grew up in Yerushalayim. There was this takana that was instituted by the Hasidim who came from Europe, Hasidei Ashkenaz, in the late 18th century, mid 18th century, 19th century, where they decided in Yerushalayim, based on a statement from the Mishnah that one cannot let the dead body remain overnight in Yerushalayim, so they would bury in the very same day, and this has become really an obsession with some people that. And when I say an obsession, the problem is when the family is not interested in that, but the rabbis force them to do it because this is the minhag here, and they say, but we have relatives coming from out of town, or we want to wait, and they would not let them do that. And in the Orthodox neighborhoods where I grew up, in Mekor Baruch in Yerushalayim, and the same thing in Mea Sha'arim and other Hasidic neighborhoods, whenever there was a funeral, they wanted to make sure that the burial is done right away, sometimes within hours of death. But they also wanted to make sure that as many people can come to the funeral as possible. I don't know if they still do it today because maybe with the internet, maybe they still use it for that. But I've seen it a couple of years ago, and that is they rent a car, or there's a dedicated car for that with speakers, like the Blues Brothers going to announce that they're putting the band together, and they just go around and say the Lavoya fun, this and that. Well, and sometimes you have 2 or 3 a day, and it's really nerve-wracking, during, and this is not really something that you should do. You invite people, yes, and if you want to do it right away, it's one prerogative, but don't have to wake up whole neighborhoods to do that. Last comment that I see here from Rabbi Rubin is about the Mordechai Eliyahu writes wine is allowed during Shiva, just not to get drunk. But there are a lot. There's a whole gamut. There's a whole gamut of practices there, and I know that, and we'll talk about it later on. That regarding wine and meat, it goes from people who would not touch wine or touch meat to people who would serve meat to everyone who comes to the house, and then again you have people who would not eat at the house of mourning, and people who insist that everybody who comes to visit would eat. So with this, we'll conclude officially. We'll remain a couple of minutes. I have another class coming up on the parasha, but I'll remain a couple of minutes to see if any pressing questions. Thank you so much. Bezrat Hashem, it's the beginning of a great journey.